Hey guys, welcome back to The Readers. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is an entitled people story. I never thought I would be the type of person to get into a neighborhood dispute, but here we are. This whole mess started about 6 months ago when I was living peacefully in my suburban neighborhood, minding my own business and working from home as a software engineer. I had moved into this quiet community about 2 years prior, specifically because it seemed like the perfect place to focus on my work, while enjoying a bit more space than my previous cramped apartment. My house came with a decent-sized backyard, which is why I finally decided to get a dog. I had been wanting one for years, but never had the right living situation. After doing extensive research on breeds that would work well for someone who works from home, I settled on a border collie mix I adopted from the local shelter. I named him Data because of his incredibly smart and analytical personality, plus it fit my tech background perfectly. Data was honestly the perfect dog for my lifestyle. He was already house-trained when I got him at about 2 years old, and within a month of consistent training, he had learned basic commands and settled into a routine that worked beautifully with my work schedule. He would sleep in my office while I worked, go out for bathroom breaks when I took my own breaks, and generally was just a quiet, well-behaved companion. The thing about Data is that he really only barked when there was a legitimate reason. Unlike some dogs that bark at every little sound or movement, Data was very selective about when he felt the need to alert me to something. He might bark twice if the mail truck pulled up or give a quick woof if someone knocked on the door, but we are talking about maybe 10 to 15 seconds of barking total, and then he would settle right back down. I actually appreciated this about him because it meant when he did bark, I knew to pay attention. Our neighborhood is governed by a homeowners association, which I knew when I moved in. The HOA fees were reasonable, and the rules seemed pretty standard when I skimmed through them during the buying process. Things like keeping your lawn maintained, no cars on blocks in the driveway, no loud music after 10 p.m., that sort of thing. Nothing seemed unreasonable or overly restrictive. The HOA is run by a board of 5 residents, and the current president is this woman who lives in the house directly across the street from me. I had met her briefly when I first moved in, and she seemed pleasant enough during that initial introduction. She told me about trash day schedules and mentioned that if I had any questions about neighborhood rules, I should feel free to ask. At the time, she came across as just a helpful neighbor. However, over the past 2 years, I had started to notice that she seemed to take her HOA role very seriously, maybe too seriously. I would see her walking around the neighborhood with a notepad, taking pictures of people's houses. She had apparently sent notices to various neighbors about minor violations like mailbox posts that needed repainting or garden borders that extended slightly into common areas. I had managed to avoid any issues with her so far, mostly because I tried to keep my property neat and followed all the rules I was aware of. That changed on a Tuesday morning in early March. I was in my home office, focused on debugging a particularly tricky piece of code when Data started barking. This was around 10:45 in the morning, and I could hear the rumble of the school bus making its way down our street. Data barked twice, maybe 3 times total, and then stopped. The whole thing lasted perhaps 12 seconds. I remember thinking it was actually good that he alerted me because I'd been so focused on work that I had not even noticed the bus, which meant I knew approximately what time it was without having to check the clock. I did not think anything more about it. Data settled back down under my desk, and I continued working. The rest of the day proceeded normally, and I honestly forgot all about the brief barking incident. That is why I was completely shocked when I found an official-looking envelope in my mailbox 3 days later. The return address showed it was from the HOA management company, and my first thought was that it was probably some routine communication about upcoming maintenance or a board meeting announcement. Instead, when I opened it, I found a formal violation notice dated the day after the barking incident. The letter was printed on official HOA letterhead and written in that cold corporate language that immediately puts you on the defensive. The notice stated that I was in violation of Section 4.2 of the HOA covenants regarding noise nuisances and specifically cited excessive dog barking that was disturbing the peace of surrounding residents. The fine was $100, and I had 10 days to pay it or face additional daily penalties of $25. I read the letter 3 times, thinking I must be missing something. Excessive dog barking? Data had barked for maybe 12 seconds total. I had been working from home for over a year at that point, so I was very familiar with Data's barking patterns. He was not an excessive barker by any reasonable standard. The letter also included a copy of Section 4.2 of the HOA covenants, which I had never really studied in detail before. The relevant portion stated that residents must not allow pets to create noise disturbances that interfere with the peaceful enjoyment of neighboring properties. It went on to define excessive noise as any continuous or repeated sounds that could be considered disruptive to surrounding residents. The language was pretty vague, which I found frustrating. What constituted continuous or repeated? How long did barking need to last to be considered excessive? There were no specific time limits or decibel measurements mentioned anywhere in the text. I was annoyed, but figured this had to be some kind of misunderstanding. Maybe someone had confused my dog with another dog in the neighborhood, or perhaps there had been some other incident I was not aware of. I decided to respond professionally and factually to clear things up. I happened to have a security camera system that I had installed shortly after moving in, mainly for package deliveries and general home security. The cameras include audio recording, and I realized I could actually pull up the exact footage from Tuesday morning to verify what had happened. I reviewed the camera footage and confirmed what I remembered. At exactly 10:47 a.m., Data had barked twice as the school bus passed by our house. The total duration of the barking was 11 seconds. After the bus passed, Data immediately returned to his normal quiet behavior. I wrote a polite but detailed email to the HOA management company, addressing it to the board. I explained that I was contesting the violation notice because the incident they referenced did not meet any reasonable definition of excessive noise. I attached a copy of the audio file from my security camera, complete with timestamps, showing the brief and entirely reasonable barking incident. In my email, I pointed out that the barking lasted only 11 seconds and was clearly a normal response to the school bus, which passes by every weekday at approximately the same time. I noted that this type of brief alerting behavior is completely normal for dogs and should not be considered excessive by any standard. I concluded the email by stating that I would not be paying the fine because no actual violation had occurred, and I requested that the notice be withdrawn. I thought that would be the end of it. The evidence was clear, and any reasonable person would see that the complaint was unfounded. I expected to receive an email within a few days acknowledging the mistake and withdrawing the violation. Instead, 2 days later, I received another email from the HOA president herself. Her response was nothing like what I had hoped for. Her email was short and dismissive. She wrote that the violation stood as issued and that my dog was a known noise issue in the neighborhood. She stated that multiple residents had complained about my dog's barking, though she provided no details about when these alleged complaints had occurred or what specific incidents they referenced. The email went on to say that failure to pay the fine within the original 10-day deadline would result in daily penalty fees of $25, and that continued violations could result in legal action to enforce the covenants. Then, almost as an afterthought, she added a comment about how she had noticed that my lawn appeared to be slightly longer than the recommended length, and suggested I review the landscaping requirements in the covenants to ensure I remained in compliance. That last part really got to me. It was such an obvious power play, bringing up a completely unrelated issue just to remind me that she was watching and could find other things to complain about if she wanted to. Reading that email, I realized this was not really about Data's barking at all. This was about the HOA president flexing her authority and picking on someone she thought would just quietly pay the fine rather than fight back. She probably figured that since I was a quiet neighbor who kept to himself, I would be an easy target who would not cause trouble. That night, I could not sleep. I kept thinking about the unfairness of the situation and how frustrated I was that someone could just make up violations and expect people to pay fines without any real evidence or due process. The more I thought about it, the more determined I became to fight this properly. I decided that if the HOA president wanted to play games with the rules, I would make sure I knew every single rule better than she did. I pulled up the complete HOA covenants and declarations document on my computer and started reading through the entire thing page by page. Most of it was pretty standard stuff about architectural approvals, maintenance responsibilities, and general community guidelines. But as I read through the sections more carefully, I started noticing something interesting. The pet section was longer and more detailed than I had realized, but it was also poorly written and inconsistent in some areas. There were restrictions on certain types of animals, requirements for licensing and vaccination, and various noise and nuisance provisions. But as I read through it multiple times, I noticed something that made me sit up and pay attention. Nowhere in the entire pet section was there any limit specified on the number of dogs a resident could have. The covenants talked about commercial breeding operations being prohibited, and there were some restrictions on livestock and exotic animals, but when it came to regular domestic dogs, the document was silent on quantity limits. I read through that section probably 10 times to make sure I was not missing anything. I even did word searches for terms like limit, maximum, number, and quantity. Nothing. The omission seemed intentional at first, but as I thought about it more, I realized it was probably just an oversight by whoever had written the original covenants years ago. They had probably assumed that common sense would prevail and that residents would not abuse the lack of specific limits. But here was the thing about malicious compliance. Sometimes when people try to use rules as weapons against others, those same rules can be turned around in ways they never expected. I started thinking about what would happen if I suddenly had more than one dog. Not just one more dog, but several more dogs. All perfectly legal according to the HOA covenants, but definitely more noticeable than my current single, quiet dog. The more I thought about it, the more the idea appealed to me. If the HOA president wanted to complain about noise from one well-behaved dog who barked for 11 seconds, what would she do if I suddenly had 4 dogs who were all perfectly within the rules, but collectively made more noise than Data ever had? I spent the next few days researching local animal shelters and rescue organizations. I was not going to just adopt random dogs impulsively. If I was going to do this, I wanted to make sure I could properly care for whatever animals I brought home, and I wanted to choose dogs that would be good fits for my situation while also maximizing the impact of my plan. I also wanted to make sure that whatever I did would ultimately benefit the animals involved. The last thing I wanted was to adopt dogs just to prove a point and then not be able to care for them properly. After visiting several shelters and talking to volunteers, I found 3 dogs that seemed perfect for what I had in mind. The first was a beagle mix named Charlie, who had been surrendered because his previous owners said he was too vocal for their apartment living situation. The second was a husky mix named Luna, who was described as energetic and talkative. The third was a German shepherd mix named Max, who was very alert and protective. All 3 dogs were healthy, well-socialized, and had been in the shelter system for several months, which meant they really needed homes. The shelter staff was thrilled that I wanted to adopt multiple animals, especially since I had a large yard and work-from-home flexibility that would allow me to properly exercise and train them. I went through all the proper adoption procedures, including having the dogs meet Data to make sure they would get along. The shelter required a home visit to confirm I could properly house multiple large dogs, and I passed all their requirements easily. The adoption process took about a week to complete all the paperwork and scheduling. During that time, I prepared my house and yard for 3 additional dogs. I bought extra food and water bowls, additional beds, more toys, and made sure my fence was secure enough for the larger pack. I also did something else during that week. I filed a formal response to the HOA violation notice, again stating that I was contesting the fine and would not pay it. I wanted to make sure the HOA had clear documentation of my position before I implemented my plan. On a Saturday morning in mid-March, I brought home Charlie, Luna, and Max. The change in my household dynamics was immediate and dramatic. Where I had previously had one calm, quiet dog who rarely made noise, I now had 4 dogs with very different personalities and energy levels. Data, being the established resident, took on something of a leadership role with the new pack. But Charlie the Beagle had opinions about everything and expressed them vocally. Luna the Husky had a habit of talking back when you spoke to her, and Max the German Shepherd was very alert to any activity in the neighborhood. Individually, none of the dogs were problematic, but collectively, they created a much more noticeable presence. When the mail truck came by, it was no longer just Data giving 2 quick barks. Now it was Charlie howling, Luna talking, Max giving a few warning barks, and Data joining in occasionally. The same thing happened when other dogs in the neighborhood barked, when delivery trucks passed by, when kids rode by on bikes, and during various other normal daily activities. Importantly, none of the barking was truly excessive in duration. Each individual incident still lasted only 15 to 30 seconds at most before the dogs settled down. But the frequency and volume had definitely increased with 4 dogs instead of 1. I knew the noise level had gone up, and I felt a little bad for my immediate neighbors who had not done anything wrong. But I also knew that what was happening was completely legal according to the HOA rules, and more importantly, it was going to make a point about the dangers of arbitrary enforcement. I did not have to wait long for a response. On Tuesday morning, just 3 days after I'd brought the new dogs home, I found another envelope from the HOA in my mailbox. This one was even more official looking than the first, marked as urgent and requiring immediate attention. The letter was longer than the first one and much more aggressively worded. It stated that multiple residents had filed complaints about excessive dog noise coming from my property and that the situation had escalated to an unacceptable level. The HOA president demanded that I immediately remove the 3 additional dogs from the property, pay the original $100 fine plus an additional $300 in escalated violation fees, and attend a mandatory hearing before the HOA board to address my flagrant disregard for community standards. The letter threatened legal action if I did not comply within 5 days, and it mentioned something about the potential for liens being placed against my property for unpaid fines. Reading that letter, I knew I had achieved exactly what I had hoped for. The HOA president had taken the bait completely and was now demanding that I do something that she had no legal authority to require. It was time for the next phase of my plan. I spent the next day preparing for what I knew would be a confrontational but necessary conversation. I gathered all my documentation, including the original HOA covenants, my adoption paperwork for all 4 dogs, veterinary records showing they were all licensed and up to date on vaccinations, and my security camera evidence from the original incident. I also did additional research on HOA law in our state to make sure I understood my rights and the limits of the HOA's authority. On Thursday morning, I called the HOA management company and requested an immediate board meeting to address the violations and demands outlined in their recent letter. I explained that I had substantial evidence and legal concerns that needed to be addressed urgently. The management company scheduled an emergency board meeting for the following Tuesday evening. All 5 board members would be present, along with the HOA attorney and a representative from the management company. I knew this was going to be my one chance to present my case clearly and persuasively. If I could show the board members that the HOA president had overstepped her authority and created a legal liability for the association, I might be able to turn this whole situation around. But I also knew that I was potentially walking into a hostile environment where the other board members might side with their president regardless of the facts. The week leading up to the board meeting felt like preparing for a trial. I organized all my evidence, practiced my presentation, and tried to anticipate every possible argument they might make. I also made sure all 4 dogs were on their best behavior during that week. I wanted to be able to demonstrate that they were well cared for and properly managed, not just a pack of uncontrolled animals creating chaos. When Tuesday evening arrived, I loaded up my folder of documentation and drove to the community center where HOA meetings were held. This was where things were going to get interesting. The next one is a malicious compliance story. A little bit of background. Due to horrible teachers and my easily intimidated personality, I developed the fear of making mistakes, since I was getting yelled at constantly for making some. Now, my body tried to avoid school and the stress that comes with it by developing the habit of vomiting to prove my mother I was sick so I could stay home. Problem was, my body tries it a lot when I get stressed out. Now I can suppress that habit to a certain degree if I focus on my breathing and close my eyes, but sooner or later I have to leave the stress-causing situation, or I vomit. Now a little bit of German background since I don't know if this concept exists in other countries. We call it Zeitarbeit, and Google translated it to temporarily employment. But long story short, it just means that you don't apply at the company you want to work for. You apply for the Zeitarbeit company, ZC, who then find jobs for you. You go to the ZC, give any important information they need to find you a job you don't totally hate. And if they find something, they call you and you have an interview with the new company you may work for. Then, if you agree to work there, you are a temporarily employee for 6 months. After the 6th month, they either let you go if the company believes it doesn't work out, or you get hired and now have a full job. In theory, that sounds awesome. In practicality, the companies spare money if they let go of the temporarily employee and circle to new ones, so your chance of staying is barely non-existing. Not to mention, in the 6th month, they don't need a reason to let you go, other than to say, it doesn't work out. Now, to the story. The first 2 jobs I got through ZC, I try hard to impress them. Doing overtime, work more outside my job description, always being on time, and never be sick. I ignored my mental problems and drowned them at home to endure everything. However, I wouldn't be here if I got hired. This story takes place in 2018, my 4th job, a factory where I have to pack and sort stuff. However, now I was far less enthusiastic, no overtime, keeping to my job description, but I still was always on time and stayed my 40 hours week. However, the manager demanded overtime nearly daily. I wasn't going to do it, not for minimum wage, and she didn't like it, but I was doing my job, so I believe she kept me in for the full 6 months before they let me go. But then, I made an absolute fatal mistake by daring to get sick. I got a cyst very close to my private area, and I could barely walk, stand, or even sit. Laying was uncomfortable, but at least not painful. I went to the doctor, got antibiotics, and a doctor's note for 7 days. 5 for the antibiotics, and 2 to see if it helped enough. I called in my job to state I was sick for a week, but my manager demanded I gave it to her in person, or she would let me go then and there. Now I was annoyed, tired, and in pain that I have to go in, since I was just in my 2nd month working there. So I accepted and my parents drove me in. I waddled like an X-legged penguin through the factory into her office. She didn't saw me walk since she was writing something. I put the doctor's notice on her desk, close to some other documents. She looked up at me and started talking. A lot. Now, you can imagine that condescending Karen tone in her voice. She started lecturing me how she dislikes I don't do overtime, and now that I'm lazy and went to the doctor to get a week of paid vacation, that I need to work on my working morale and that my chances of getting hired are very slim, and I need to put in 110% if I want to have a chance. Now, my pain around my private area started worsening due to me standing, so I barely listened to her after that, but I noticed her voice got louder and louder, and she somehow talked herself into rage, nearly yelling at this point, and I felt my stomach started turning. I started my strategies to keep my stomach calm, since I knew it would be maybe a few minutes of her complaining before I can leave. I tried to cut in to explain that I need to go home to rest, but she had none of it and interrupt me, telling me how disrespectful it is to interrupt some. The irony, lel. Cue my malicious compliance. I stopped calming down my stomach and let it does what it want to do, and surprise, surprise, not even after a minute, everything comes out, hitting her desk and covers some of her documents and half of my doctor's note. Her face was absolutely priceless, though I wished I could enjoyed it more, next to my pain and new taste. After her initial shock and silence, she finally sent me home to rest. I still think about it till today. After the week, I came back rather healthy, and I got pulled into her office, where she and another boss manager waited for me. After a few words back and forth, they asked me why I didn't even try turn around as I vomited, since I apparently damaged and destroyed some important documents. And even though I was not obligated to it, I explained the cyst I had, that I couldn't even walk, stand, or turn around without a lot of pain, let alone going to the next restroom or trash bin, and that I shouldn't even been there in the first place, since a doctor's note can be handover after I came back. The other manager boss looked super pissy at my manager. After more unimportant back and forth, I returned back to work. I still got let go after the 6th month, but I wasn't sorry about this job. I then decided to start focusing on my mental health and my addiction problem. For the last bit of fact, the manager was gone quickly after me, and the factory was destroyed end of 2024. According to some of my old colleagues, they were constantly hiring, and more people were quitting on their own. The next one is an entitled people story. I got my first professional job during the pandemic 90 minutes from my hometown, close to family, but not close enough for them to visit frequently. This story takes place during one of my parents' rare visits. I want to make something clear up front. I love my parents. My mom did a damn good job raising my brother and me during a drawn-out, messy divorce, and my stepdad was a stabilizing force I never got with my bio dad. However, their political discussions, which are frequent, can be frustrating to engage with because of how set in their beliefs they are. I love talking politics. I'm currently finishing up a graduate degree in public affairs. But talking with them on politics sometimes feels like talking at a wall. This is one of those rare instances where the point I wanted them to understand got through. My stepdad was down in the basement looking at some electrical work. Despite being the more politically vocal of the two, he doesn't factor into this story. My mom and I were in the living room. We were talking about the protests against racial violence that were happening across the US, and my mom said something to the effect of, if they, the protesters, don't like it here, they can go someplace else. If they don't like it here, they can go someplace else. I felt my chest tighten at hearing those words. I sat in silence, letting her have the last word for the moment because I was stewing on that line, trying to figure out why it bothered me so much. I knew my parents both generally frowned on protests, but wasn't expecting this kind of position. Eventually, I figured it out. It felt like she was more interested in the comfort of the status quo than solving people's problems, and it rubbed the wrong way like no statement before or since has. Dismissing people's concerns in such a hand-wavy way is not how I wanted to view or engage in politics, because in work I am very much motivated by improvements and making things better than they were. It's part of why I am about to get a job in local government management. I didn't say anything for the moment while I sorted out my thoughts, and my mom stepped in to use my bathroom. Here's where the story gets mildly spicy. My bathroom is in the worst condition I have ever seen a bathroom in any context. I hadn't scrubbed the toilet bowl in a couple of months. The sink was letting out rusty water, thanks landlord. There was hair all over the floor from my dog. I had meant to clean it up before they arrived, but lost track of time and didn't get around to it. Bar and gas station bathrooms didn't compare to how crusty my bathroom was. My mom was in and out as quick as possible, and I don't blame her one bit. If I had any other bathroom in the house, I would have sent her to that one. Your bathroom is disgusting! It was, and to claim otherwise would be a blatant lie. Sensing the opportunity for a glorious clapback, I took my shot, my face stoic. If you don't like it, you can always go someplace else. I couldn't read what she was thinking on her face, but I didn't need to. Our family has a tendency to clam up whenever they are thinking deeply about something, and she wasn't saying a word, laser focused on me. She was frowning, but the gears were definitely turning. I think the bathroom helped her to contextualize a couple problems with the going someplace else argument. 1. It dismisses the lived experiences of the people with the complaints, basically the equivalent of saying, "I'm sorry you feel that way." I'm sure she felt that way when I reflected her belief back at her, because we have very similar personalities, and I would have felt that way were I in her shoes. I think that's the entire reason why my response was so effective. 2. It doesn't solve either group's problems. My mom would have had to find a public restroom, and my bathroom would still be a mess. No one comes out ahead. 3. It's complacency that ignores the potential for improvement just because you don't think anything needs improving. She was comfortable with the status quo, and through her argument fell prey to the misconception that better and good are synonymous. The bathroom reflection illustrated how entitled her position with the protesters was. For the record, she's not an entitled person, it was just an entitled belief. While I'm not sure my mom ever changed her mind on protests and protesters, I think it did get her to at least interrogate her political beliefs more closely, which I count as a win. After that legendary Uno reverse card, we, unsurprisingly, kept the topics apolitical and had a great rest of the visit. As they left, I felt proud of my ability to think on my feet and illustrate my point on the fly like that. Then I immediately went into my bathroom and gave it a proper scrubbing. Edit. There are a couple of points brought up in the comments that I want to address, just for clarity's sake. The first is that this story somehow caused my mom to shut down her conversation on the topic because she thought it was personal. I can understand why you'd think that, but we have had many conversations on protests since. I don't get personal when it comes to topics, but the way I responded probably makes it seem like I was angry when that wasn't the case. I originally put clam up whenever they know they've been got, but I changed that because that made it sound like my intention was to throw her argument back in her face. Admittedly, there might have been a little of that, but my primary intention was to make her consider the flaws in her argument. The next one is an entitled parent story. So, for some background, hi, I work at a small mom-and-pop reptile shop. I'm 20 and trans-mask and autistic. Despite having been hired to only take care of the reptiles, because I love reptiles more than I like people, my manager and boss trust me to open and run the shop by myself. I don't have a problem with this, I'm just setting the scene. So a month or two ago, I was asked to open the shop. I, of course, went to open, and when I got there, I saw a woman standing outside with 2 young boys, probably around like 6, 8. No clue how long she was standing there, since I got there just before opening time. As I'm getting out of my car and getting out my key to open the shop, one of the young boys looks at me and says, "Is that Daddy? Who's that?" I just stay silent because I have no idea how to respond to that. Despite being trans-mask, at that time I was only maybe on my first week of testosterone, so I didn't, and still don't, look like a guy, much less a dad. If anything, most people tease me for looking like I should be in middle school. Anyways, the woman looks at me and says, "Ignore him, he's autistic," to which I respond, "Oh, no worries, I'm on the spectrum as well, I understand." I open the shop and this kid is still thinking I'm his dad or something, while also at the same time asking to his mom who I am and at the same time addressing me with female pronouns, which normally I'd be quick to correct, but I felt now was not the time. The woman was telling the boy to stop, and I'm not great with social cues, but if she's telling him to stop, that tells me I have no obligation to answer him. So I get them a mouse for their snake as requested. All goes well. When I go to ring him up, the kid starts with his barrage of the same questions again. I'm uncomfortable because I don't know if I should answer or not due to the woman telling him to be quiet, and because I generally just do not like small children. But after a while of him continuing to refer to me with female pronouns, I speak up and awkwardly say, well, firstly, I'm a boy. And before I could tell the kid my name to get him to be quiet, she suddenly barks at me, "He doesn't know any of that gender stuff, just tell him your name." I'm taken aback by this, but I do that. Tell the kid my name. Then he says, "Oh, he's not daddy," and seems to be content. She then takes her kids and storms out while another customer comes in. He asks what happened, since apparently she looked mad. Hard for me to tell, can't read people well. Plus, she kinda has resting idiot face. So I have him the spark notes of what happened, to which he found ridiculous and quite hilarious. I went to get him a rodent as requested too. While I was upstairs picking out a good-sized rat, I hear him talking to someone with a female voice. I then hear the words "Mama Bear," and in the back of my mind I'm thinking, that better not be that Karen. And surprise! Surprise! Soon as I come down the stairs, I see her bleached blonde hair standing by the rack of UV and heat bulbs, glaring up at me. I don't even get a chance to give the man his rat before she tells me she wants to talk to me for a moment. She then proceeds to tell me how I disrespected her and her son, and how he's sitting in the car crying. He was completely happy and content when they left. Wouldn't be surprised if he was crying because of her yelling. She then once again ranted on about how he doesn't understand gender stuff, and that she wants to report me to my manager. She doesn't even let me get a single word in, and as she storms off, I say back to her, "Ma'am, I didn't do anything to disrespect you or your son. I would also like to once again bring up that I am autistic as well, and I don't understand people much, but I do try my best." She doesn't even react to that as she storms off. I was hoping she'd understand and sympathize since she has an autistic kid of her own, unless she's one of those people who assume that since I'm higher functioning than her son, that I am not actually autistic. But I end up going about the rest of the day normally, and relay the story to some friends, to which they all agree she was completely delusional, and I thought that was the end of it. Until she came back yesterday. I wasn't alone this time. Had a coworker, gonna call him Damien, with me sitting at the register. I was cleaning a ball python's tank when she came in and stopped in her tracks when she saw me. I looked up at her, thinking she looked familiar, and was about to go into my whole customer service. "Hi, can I help you with anything?" But similar to before, she speaks up before I can say anything with, "I'm here to get a mouse. I also want your manager's phone number. Remember me? Yeah, I want to report you." I'm sitting there flabbergasted like my day just started lady. I try to tell her that I don't think I can give her my manager's personal number before she cuts me off and storms over to Damien. I go back to taking care of the snakes while listening in. I can't hear all of it, but I overhear bits and pieces like how I went off on her son. All I did was tell him I was a boy, and how she wants the security feed from that day with audio. I doubt she remembers what the exact day it was. I don't. Also, the security cameras I'm pretty sure automatically delete everything after a week, and my boss would probably rather do anything than search through security feed. I'm kind of pissed about this woman, but I don't say anything until Damien passes by, to which I whisper to him, "She's a Karen, I'll explain when she leaves," to which he gives me a knowing look and nods. She doesn't try to talk to me or anything, thankfully, and once she left, I explained the story to Damien. We both had a good laugh about that. Unfortunately, she seems to be somewhat of a regular, though I've only seen her those 2 times. But that means this is not the end. I will update if she comes back. Also, I haven't told my manager about this yet because she's not usually in while I'm in, and she isn't the best with looking at her text messages. I'm gonna go in tomorrow and catch her up on all the lore, cause I know she'd be on my side. Knowing her, she'll probably find it hilarious. Update. Apparently my manager did end up speaking to this woman. According to her, the woman got offended because I said I was autistic? Like she wasn't expecting it, or she couldn't fathom the fact that someone other than her son could be autistic. I only said it as a way to sympathize, to be like, "Oh, no worries, I get it," but she instead found it as an insult in her strange, twisted mind. Anyways, my manager told her to not come in on Tuesdays since that's the day I run the shop. Anyway, thank you for watching.